Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. Our program will begin in 10 minutes. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. Our program will begin in 5 minutes. Comes back.
everybody. Wow. What a great day. So for those, I'm sure many of you have heard, but First Lady, former First Lady Barbara Bush passed away today. And in honor of her, we'd like to give her a minute of silence to pay our respects. Thank you very much.
Hello, good evening. I'm Meredith Rosenberg, and I am here for a very simple reason. This is a very important conversation, and it's such a privilege for me to be able to kick it off. It's at the nexus of education, the changing workforce, the changing workplace, our kids' future, and opportunity for all, a conversation that's so fundamental to the future of this country. And what's my perspective? I sit in a very large global executive search firm. I work with the most compelling leaders in education and technology. To have education, innovation, diversity, inclusion come together at this event right now, that is powerful. We can lead by example, by being courageous, asking the right questions, truly listening to honest feedback, holding ourselves accountable, and making visible efforts. In education, most of us agree on the goal of exceptional outcomes for students, but we don't all agree on the execution of how to achieve these outcomes. So ask yourself, are you the kind of leader that will take the hard steps to put in place the building blocks that can change organizations, innovating and making decisions that will improve outcomes for future generations, but might be hard or unpopular with your stakeholders, employees, founders, donors, or will you continue with the status quo just because it's easier? The innovators whom we are honoring today and who are speaking today, they have been courageous. They have not followed the status quo, and they have led by example. Henry.
Good evening, ASU GSV. No, let me try that again. Good evening, ASU GSV. Oh, okay. I love it. So it's great to be back in sunny San Diego for this incredible event. And just want to congratulate Deb and Michael for putting together an incredible conference once again. Again, my name is Henry Hips. I'm a deputy director at the Bill and Melinda Gates program, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And we have been a longtime sponsor of this event and want to thank Deb and Michael for their longtime partnership. And this is one of my favorite parts of the year, like all of the sessions, the endless side meetings. This is still one of my favorite parts, and it's an opportunity for us to honor a handful of what are actually many innovators of color in our space that very often are not celebrated in this magnitude, and that's one of the reasons why this excites me. So one, I also want to thank Deb and Michael for the continued focus on diversifying the audience members. And that is very much connected to the spirit of this award and the recognition that if we, in fact, are passionate and focused on public education and ultimately successful post-secondary opportunities and careers for every American, that we really do need to be focused on equitable outcomes and truly mean that it is for all folks, regardless of race and class, regardless of zip code. And ultimately, that's what this award is about, is celebrating folks who are innovators without qualification. They are innovators. And their focus has been and will continue to be on equitable outcomes for all folks, and specifically thinking about serving those who have been historically underserved. And so with that, one of the things that we struggle with every year is actually the committee voting on who the award winners are. And this year, I'm excited because it's actually such a close vote. It ended up being two folks, and two folks who are good friends of mine and good friends of the work. And so I want to go ahead and announce our two award winners for the year. Many of you know them and their incredible work. And I'll introduce them briefly and then ask them to come up. So first, Jaime Casap. So Jaime, many of you know, is an incredible evangelist for the work. He has been focused on innovation in education and focused on equitable outcomes for all students for a long time. He's a first-generation American. His people are Argentino. They settled in New York in Hell's Kitchen before it was sexy and before $25 tacos. From there, he did some groundbreaking work in Phoenix with the Phoenix Coding Academy, which was teaching coding skills to low-income students far in advance of the movement around coding that you guys are familiar with today. What you know him for is his work as the chief education evangelist for Google. And if you've ever heard him speak, he speaks with passion and deep commitment. He pulls no punches. And he always moves the conversation forward. One other point I would like to make is he's also a published author. He has a book out called On Our Street, Our First Talk About Poverty. And it is further evidence of his clear focus on serving the underserved. So with that, I want to say congratulations, man.
Thank you. Can you hold this for me? All right, thank you. Thank you, Henry. So first, I want to thank the summit. I want to thank Deborah. I want to thank Michael for first having this category. Second, putting the work that they put into this. I've been coming to the ASU GSV summit since it was happening in the conference room at Sky Song at ASU. How many of you were there that first time? Yeah, clap it up. We need you guys. Next year will be 10 years that we've been doing that. So I want to thank Deborah and Michael and the team. I know that Deborah and Michael and the team here at GSV are committed to diversity, committed to representation both of people of color and women. And I know that on Thursday, because I have these conversations with Deborah all the time, that on Thursday she's going to start talking about how to do even more next year. So she'll keep doing that. I also want to thank the folks who nominated me for this and for the committee who voted. There's nothing like being nominated and recognized by your peers. There's nothing like that. It just makes me want to work harder. But I just want to talk a little bit about the goal of the work that I do, because it's pretty simple. Because I believe that education disrupts poverty. I believe education can change a family's destiny, oftentimes in just one generation. And I know this firsthand because I am a first-generation American from New York City, like Henry stole my joke about the $25 tacos. But I know that if it not for education, I wouldn't be here today. And I was able to be here because of education and a little luck. And what I think we should all work harder on is to try to eliminate luck as a requirement to getting out of communities like Hell's Kitchen, New York, and to replace luck with opportunity. So I'm thrilled to accept this award. I want to talk a little bit about how what we need to do more than anything is present opportunities for students, especially students who are growing up the way I grew up. And I can believe one of two things. I can believe that I have a 400 IQ, and that's why I'm here standing in front of you. Or I can believe that there are millions of kids who are just like me, living and growing up in communities like Hell's Kitchen, New York, from the 70s and 80s. Now, my wife will tell you that I do not have a 400 IQ, so we will accept the second idea, which is that there are millions of kids who are just like me in our communities, and what we need to do more than anything is create opportunities for those students, for those kids, so that they can have the opportunity to solve the problems that they're interested in solving. So again, thank you very much. Thanks for having me, and look forward to talking more in the future.
All right, like I said, one reason I loved the way this year's outcome played out was because we got to celebrate two folks. So it is my pleasure to announce the second Innovator of Color Award to my good friend, Phyllis Lockett. So anybody that knows Phyllis knows that she represents Chicago to the fullest. And it sounds like we probably have a Chicago contingent somewhere over here. So Phyllis is a product of Chicago public schools and a proud daughter not only of that system, but of public school teachers. She was the founder of New Schools for Chicago, where she helped open 80 new schools and helped grow 13 charter networks in an environment that actually had no charter networks prior to her work. She then moved on to found Leap Innovations, which many of you are familiar with, in 2014 to catalyze and scale personalized learning in K-12 schools. They've worked with more than 120 public schools in Chicago public school system and have had remarkable results. They've been a partner of the Gates Foundation as well for some time, and we've been excited to see how the work has continued to evolve. And that makes it even more exciting to be able to share the stage with Phyllis and celebrate her tonight. So with that, please welcome her for her remarks. Once again, Phyllis Lockett, Leap Innovation.
Thank you all so much. This is such an honor. I just want to thank God, first and foremost, in all of his glory and what he has done in my life, for my amazing, amazing team. Leap Innovations wouldn't exist without the Leap team members that are just extraordinary, and the fearless, brave, extraordinary educators in Chicago that have stepped out of their comfort zone to innovate and elevate our kids. Thank you. I also have to thank a few game changers, people who come into your life. You know, you have people who come into your life and completely shift where you are. And, you know, if I have to give a shout out to Kim Smith and Jim Shelton, who over 10 years ago planted the seeds around this new learning ecosystem that could bring supply and demand together to work effectively to innovate and create a whole new learning opportunity for kids. And that planted the seeds for me to think about Leap Innovations. And then my sister, Deborah Quazzo, she's not Black, but she is my sister, who convinced me several years ago to go to this conference at ASU SkySong. And I was so inspired by the discussion and the individuals that were there that I stayed an extra day and wrote out the concept for Leap Innovations. So today, we have created an innovation hub in Chicago that is connecting educators and innovators to reimagine what learning can be. Our educators are reimagining their classrooms, they're redesigning for their practices to tailor learning for students every single day. we are working with over 40 ed tech partners, some of the best ed technology companies in the country that are coming to Chicago to pilot and to work with our educators to learn how they can best deliver and develop solutions that best fit the needs of our educators and our students. And that collaboration is what is driving incredible results. I believe personalized learning is the ultimate way where we are going to get to equity for every child, valuing every single student, no matter how they show up or where they're from, meeting them where they are, recognizing their differences, not as deficiencies, but as an opportunity for growth. That is what we are proving out. And I have to say that I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for so many individuals in this room who took a bet on me and my idea before we proved anything out. And the truth of the matter is, there are not enough people who look like me that are getting access to those resources. And also, to be honest with you, I am not that special. There are thousands of tremendous people of color out there who have phenomenal ideas that we need to be investing in. We have got to invest in the people who have sat in the classrooms, who have lived in the neighborhoods, who have experienced and are more proximate to the needs of our kids and our students. And I can't help but to think and reflect on this 50th anniversary of Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination and his words, that we are connected and we are linked to an inescapable network of mutuality, tied to a single garment of history. And we can't reach our destiny if we are not proximate enough to the students that we're trying to serve, and if we are not willing to invest in the people who look like me that are trying to serve them. So thank you so much. I am so honored that you all took a leap of faith and invested in me. Thank you.
Evening. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Jim Shelton. I'm a friend of Phyllis Lockett. It is my pleasure and honor to be here with you tonight. Right now, I have the honor of actually bringing to the stage someone who you all know as a great singer, matter of fact, Grammy Award-winning singer and songwriter, an actor, John Legend. Now, what you may be disappointed to hear is he's not coming here to sing to you. But what you should be glad to hear is that there are things that you may or may not know about John Legend. He has been an activist in a number of forms and focused on how you actually create the kind of America that we say we aspire to for some time. He created years ago Show Me America in order to focus on creating the kinds of communities that are equitable that we want to see. He has invested in creating the LRNG innovators because of his commitment to education and tapping into the power of community and people close to the work to actually create change. And he's also focused on Free America because he knows that just because someone doesn't wind up on the right path the first time out, that they don't deserve a really important chance to recover. Tonight, he's going to tell you more about his work and his story. But first, I want him to come out to a video that shows a little bit about the work that he's been invested in. And then he'll take the stage.
At LRNG Innovators, we know that all young people can learn and achieve when given the opportunity to pursue their interests.
LRNG Innovators has allowed us to connect our out-of-school program with in-school learning.
You're working towards a project that you're interested in as a student.
Allowing students to think about making their mark in the world.
It was an amazing opportunity for our students.
Bringing students from the classroom to see how professionals in the field make a go at it.
We'll have guest speakers like reporters or journalists.
We basically make games, we learn about what goes behind the production of games.
It's taught me a lot about future art careers.
By investing in teachers and their ideas, LRNG Innovators aims to bolster student success in and out of school.
You start seeing like a new different thought process, and that opens up their minds.
It's helping me figure out what I want to do and who I want to be.
Game design gave me way more opportunities involving real-world skills that you can't really get in a normal classroom environment.
The LRNG Innovators Grant helps students find purpose.
To expand their education beyond the classroom doors.
It's something that's never been done before.
I hope you will join me in supporting your innovative teachers who are designing the learning of the future.
Thank you. Am I going to walk out to Jesus music every time I speak now? It's not the worst thing in the world, I have to say. Thank you to Jim for that warm introduction, and I'm really excited to be here. Good evening to all of you. It's so good to be here at this conference, and I'm so excited to talk about the topic of transforming education and investing in the future of talent. This is a subject that is near and dear to my heart, and it's a pleasure to be with so many intelligent and thoughtful leaders here today who are ready to make the world a better place through innovation and through communities coming together. I also want to extend a special thank you to Deborah Quazzo and Michael Moe for inviting me to speak with you all today. I've come a long way from Springfield, Ohio. Yeah. I grew up in a blue-collar Midwestern town called Springfield, Ohio. Everyone asks me if that's where the Simpsons are from. It's not clear which Springfield the Simpsons are from. There are a lot of Springfields in America. But I'm from Springfield, Ohio. It was a pretty normal upbringing for me. I had two loving parents, a factory worker and a stay-at-home mom. I went to church on Sundays, Tuesdays, Wednesdays. My grandfather was the pastor. My mother was the choir director. My grandmother was the organist. So I was at choir rehearsal, Bible study, Sunday morning service, Sunday night service, revival services. I was at church a lot. So I was very well prepared to play Jesus Christ. Anyway, I was surrounded both by my immediate family and my extended family, and they showered us with love, and they really wanted the best for us, just like most parents and grandparents want for their kids. Education was always a priority for my parents, so much so that they even homeschooled me and my siblings for several years during grade school. And they took the time to teach us more than academics. They taught us about character, about what it meant to live a good life. My father often talked to us about his definition of what success meant. He told us that it wasn't measured in money and material things, but it was measured in love and joy and the lives you're able to touch, the lives you're able to help. And my parents walked the walk. They gave of themselves to our church. They took in foster kids and helped the homeless, even though we didn't have a lot of money ourselves. Growing up in our home also meant you were immersed in art and music and encouraged to be creative. We had a piano and a drum kit in the house, and I begged to take piano lessons when I was 4 years old, started singing in the church choir and in school plays by the time I was 7. So I fell in love with music and creating at a very young age. And I wouldn't be here today without the many hours of practice and the many opportunities that I had to develop as a young performer. And my family was in many ways a model family for our church and local community. My parents were leaders. They were raising intelligent, talented kids in a loving environment. We even had a little singing group called the Stevens Five. We thought we were the gospel version of the Jackson Five. I had a cousin who sang a little better than me and had a higher voice, so he was Michael. I was probably like Jermaine or Tito. But things started to fall apart when I was 10. My maternal grandmother passed away that year when she was only 58 years old, and her death devastated my family. She and my mother were very close, and her death sent my mother into a deep depression that eventually tore our family apart. My world was shattered. My parents got divorced. My mother disappeared into over a decade of drugs and despair, and I was confused and disoriented. I busied myself with schoolwork and lots of activities, and I tried not to think too much about the pain of my family situation. And somehow, despite everything else going on with my personal world in turmoil, I not only graduated high school, but I was the salutatorian of my class. I was accepted into some of the best schools in the country and decided to go to the University of Pennsylvania. Yay, Penn. We have some notable alumni in this country. Some we're proud of, some we're less proud of. I was lucky enough to make it to college to eventually see my dreams fulfilled. But I'm not sure that would have been possible if it hadn't been for the great teachers who saw in me something that I didn't always see in myself. They encouraged me to pursue my passions, the same passions that I had developed growing up in our home, the same dreams that could have been derailed when my family situation fell apart. I write songs for a living now. I even give a lot of speeches. But when I was in high school, I didn't even see writing as one of my strengths. I had an English teacher named Mrs. Bodie who believed in me. Slowly but surely, she showed me that I could write with creativity, passion, and clarity. She gave us projects in our classroom that stimulated our creativity and made us feel like we could create something great. She and a few other adults at my high school helped me gain confidence in my skills, and they pushed me to aim high. Neither of my parents had gone to college, but my guidance counselor, Mr. Dixon, took me under his wing and mentored me through the college application process. Both he and Mrs. Bodie saw something in me. They believed I could aim higher than my circumstances. I could do and be anything I dared to dream. I'm so grateful to all of those folks who helped me. But I also know that I was one of the fortunate ones in my school. A lot of kids in my high school didn't even make it to graduation, let alone college. I still remember standing at the podium, addressing my graduating class, and realizing that it had shrunk to about half the size it was at freshman orientation. Somewhere over the course of those 4 years, half of my peers had found a reason to give up on high school and drop out. And if I hadn't found great teachers like Mrs. Bodie and great mentors like Mr. Dixon, or rather if they hadn't found me and saw something in me that they wanted to cultivate, I might have been one of those people who didn't make it. Unfortunately, in my community and in many communities around the country, my experience represents the exception and not the rule. All over America, there are young people in danger of having their dreams derailed by an unjust system. In 2015, a major report found that for the first time in at least 50 years, more than half of all American public school students live in poverty. Among the developed countries, we are not in the top 10 for high school graduation rates. And while this statistic is unsettling enough on its own, consider that just 10% of our schools are responsible for 50% of the students who drop out. And those schools are concentrated in our poorest communities, the communities most in need of the transformative power of a good education. These schools are sometimes referred to as dropout factories. Now that's a tragic moniker, but it's essentially accurate. These neighborhoods are often neglected. Their schools are under-resourced. We allow our kids to grow up with all these challenges, with so little opportunity, and then we tell our police and our criminal justice system to deal with it by occupying our communities and locking our kids up. This is unacceptable and calls, yes. And it calls for radical transformation to our system and the way we think about opportunity and justice for everybody. A transformation that will create equal opportunity for all. Part of that transformation will require us to think about big systemic issues like persistent residential and school segregation, about too many of our students living in poverty and attending schools with high concentrations of impoverished students. But we also need to work within our schools to improve instruction, to provide all the resources our kids need to break the cycle of poverty. For years, I've been working to make schools better through my nonprofit, the Show Me campaign. I know from the data and from my own personal experience that teachers have power to change children's lives. Yeah. Even when kids are growing up in tough circumstances, even when the school isn't so great, teachers have the power to make a real difference. So at the Show Me campaign, we support and encourage great teaching with the aim of improving instruction for all students. One of the ways we do this is through an initiative we started in partnership with the National Writing Project and Collective Shift. It's called LRNG Innovators. You saw a little video about it before I came out. Every year, we give grants to innovative public school educators who can think beyond the walls of a classroom and create learning experiences to spark passion and create purpose for all students. Whether it's fostering creative writing in an aspiring songwriter or sparking a passion for coding and computer science, teachers can unlock potential across the country, no matter the zip code of the school. Educators know the challenges they face in their classrooms every day, and educators know the best ways to solve those challenges. Yes. I believe that educators are the ones who will reimagine and reinvent our future classrooms to be the engaging learning laboratories that spark curiosity and excitement for learning in our youth. And through LRNG Innovators, we want to support them to do that. And we want them to share their innovations so that teachers everywhere can learn from one another. But we also know they can't do it alone. We need businesses, community organizations, and schools to work side by side to solve these challenges together, to create opportunities for youth that connect in and out of school time, opportunities that prepare them for the workforce, for life, and to be productive members of their community. Now, what does this actually look like on the ground? Well, in Brooklyn, New York, teachers built a program that combines video game design and wearable fashion. This effort engages students while connecting them to leaders at the cutting edge of tech, gaming, and design. And in the process, these students are developing new skills and even a possible career path. In Oxford, Mississippi, female students and their teachers are teaming up on environmental research projects with local community leaders and some of the field's leading scientists. And they're doing it at such a critical moment in their lives when these young women might otherwise be discouraged from pursuing careers in science. And in Charlottesville, Virginia, even before the riots broke out, even before white supremacists marched in the streets to keep a statue of Robert E. Lee up in the park, high school students across 3 schools were working together with civic leaders and corporate sponsors to rethink monuments in their community. Together, they are collaborating to conduct field and academic research as they design and develop multimedia monuments that they feel represents them. They are at the epicenter of this urgent national conversation, providing leadership to it in a way that celebrates and amplifies diversity and inclusion. Yes. My favorite moments with LRNG Innovators have been when our programs unlock something inside students that they didn't even know was there. Throughout this journey, it has been humbling and it's been thrilling to see what our teacher teams have dreamed up to spark excitement and passion in their students. But through my education work, I've also come to realize that the fight for educational equity is deeply tied to the system of mass incarceration in our country right now. Because all too often, the system of mass incarceration begins in our schools. Instead of getting a good education, so many youth, a lot of them look like me and many of you, are being channeled into what we've all taken to calling the school to prison pipeline. If these boys and girls of color act out in schools, even in minor ways that might once have meant nothing more than an apology or a conversation with the principal or detention, they may find themselves down at the police station talking to the cops. They may end up with a record. They may end up ripped away from their families and their communities, shoved into a system that keeps well over 2 million people locked in cages and disenfranchises nearly 6 million people. This isn't an exaggeration. In a juvenile center I visited a couple years ago, I met a 15-year-old girl, 15 years old, who'd been shuttled from the principal's office to jail for fighting in the schoolyard. She was in jail for a schoolyard scuffle. Sadly, short-sighted policies like these can often lead young people into a brutal lifetime of bouncing in and out of the criminal justice system, extinguishing their dreams before they ever get a chance to pursue them. I believe we can break that cycle. Yes, by giving kids a path to succeed when they're young, but also by helping adults find a way out of our cruel system of mass incarceration. The degree of punishment and disenfranchisement is appalling. We cannot call ourselves the land of the free when we treat our people like this. Haunted by their criminal records, 60% of formerly incarcerated individuals remain unemployed 1 year after their release. Last year, in partnership with New Profit, my organization Free America launched Unlocked Futures to support entrepreneurs who have been impacted by the criminal justice system. This accelerator was born out of the need to offset the reality that those with a criminal record are often left without a path to employment. Now, when we get to the panel discussion in a moment, you're going to hear from the amazing Topeka Sam. She's a participant in Unlocked Futures. Unlocked Futures isn't just an investment in specific individuals and specific business plans, although that is critical. This is also a commitment to the idea that everyone has something precious to give to this world. This is an expression of love for all people on the planet. I believe in the power of love to bring us closer to justice. Dr. Cornel West says that justice is what love looks like in public. I believe that all of you are here because you love our young people. I believe that if we all show more love to our young people and to each other, it will drive us to continue the fight for opportunity for all. What would our schools look like if we were committed to loving in public? We would recognize that no child is born wanting to commit crimes, and we would do everything we could do to make sure they lived in safe neighborhoods with excellent teachers and good, nutritious food to eat. And we would not criminalize them for minor behavioral problems in school. This is a powerful vision, and not just for what it can mean in the lives of countless young people. It is also a vision of what our country can be: just, equitable, and thriving. It is how we build the pipeline for a skilled workforce. It's how we expand and diversify the pool of talented individuals for whom so many employers are calling out, demanding bright, creative people they can hire, train, and invest in. It's how our economy continues to grow, and it's how that growth reaches and lifts up far more people than ever before. But none of this can happen as long as we continue to neglect the millions of students in our poorest communities. We need to change the reality that where a child is born, the zip code they grow up in, and how much money that child's parents make determines the quality of his or her education and life prospects. We must commit to making the mythical American dream a real possibility for more of our kids. I believe that LRNG innovators can provide just one model of that commitment, but there are so many other things we need to do, and everyone here has a role. Educators and administrators, entrepreneurs, employers, executives, and community leaders, all of us standing shoulder to shoulder, working collectively to unlock students' full potential. And that is why I wanted to be here today, to tell you about our approach, our theory of change, and to ask for your creative ideas, your partnership, your passion, your investment. But more than that, I'm inviting you to join what to me feels like an incredible growing movement. It's a movement built around the belief that the only way to build just, equitable, and thriving communities is by giving every young person both freedom from systemic hurdles that hold them back and the opportunity to unlock their greatest potential. It's a movement based on the kind of learning that happens all around us, not just within the four walls of the schoolhouse. It's a movement that says when we keep doors open and ensure that everyone, no matter their background or history, can thrive personally and professionally, we can build a workforce that leaves no one behind. It's a movement that asks, what if by coming together, we could tap the innovative potential of every student? What if we could empower every teacher and every employer hungry for talent to help all young people find their passion and purpose? Imagine the kind of force we could unleash. Imagine the talent we could unlock. This is not a thought exercise, it's an opportunity. And only by working together
But what I worry about is that for all the work of education reform, in which so many of us have been involved, all the folks in this room, we have not gotten enough done. We're moving too slowly. The gaps are too wide, right? There's a lot more that we need to do. When you look at the achievement gap, 20, 30, 40-point achievement gap between kids of color and white students. When you look at who's getting into college, who's graduating from college, yeah, we're sending more students on to college, which is a good thing, but not enough African-American students are graduating, not enough Latino students, not enough low-income students, first-generation students. So we have so much more to do, and we have to acknowledge in rooms like this that innovation hasn't yet delivered in too many places. In fact, some of the innovations in which we all have been involved aren't addressing the very equity issues that got us started in this work, right? And I worry, you know, you think about the power of technology to support learning. Too often, kids are doing activities. When I visit classrooms, I know you have this experience, Jim, you walk in a classroom and people say, oh, look at all the great technology. And then what kids are doing is a worksheet on a screen, right? It's not actually transforming learning. We know that virtual charters have been a disaster for kids all over the country. We know that in too many places, certificate programs promise a path into the workforce, but in reality, the default rates look exactly the same as they do for folks who've dropped out of college. We haven't done enough in rooms like this all over the country to say the starting place for innovation has to be how will it drive equity, how will it drive better outcomes for low-income students and students of color.
So I come to the work at this moment, which is a moment in the country where we are increasingly divided and defensive, where we're seeing violence and hate and bias bubbling up around the country, from Silicon Valley to Wall Street to our schools. And in our schools, that manifests itself in everything from extraordinary trauma to the ways in which kids are being bullied and harassed and don't feel like they are welcome and safe in schools. I also come to this at a time where we know that there's incredible income inequality, and I know there's been a lot of conversations today about artificial intelligence and many other forces that will widen that inequality. And at that moment, as we know, these are the greatest threats to our stability and our ability to sustain innovation and change and all the kind of work that we're all trying to do. I also come to this work as another graduate of the Chicago Public Schools in the South Side of Chicago, who was born and raised and now lives there, but who also had a chance as a young college grad to go work with Deborah Quazzo and Michael Moe, and understood that for a young student who wanted to be a civil rights lawyer, they told me there's a way and a place for that in the world of business and innovation. And so part of what I'm trying to do is to figure out how we design this all differently, and how do we design it so that the pathways that we're creating for children are ones where they can develop all of their human potential, and to do that understanding the kind of adversity that they get from the outside, but also the ways in which adversity is affecting what's happening within. And that even as someone who's been a civil rights lawyer who came really close to looking at, and a civil rights lawyer in the Justice Department, and before that at the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, where for years we have looked at the impacts of deep segregation, the broken democracy that we see ourselves in now, but also what happens with the school-to-prison pipeline, school policing, and the ways in which we are now segregating students not only by race, but by disability and by gender and by LGBTQ status, and the kind of harms that instills in children. And so from all of those perspectives, I'm trying to figure out how we build this out differently now, not as a lawyer and from a liability frame, but from one of like what it is that we can do to integrate all of this in on the front end so that I don't have a job on the back end.
Thanks. Topeka, before you go, I just want to call out something that I noticed when both Phyllis and Jaime spoke, and now John and Anurima. They all talked about their experiences, and especially when you heard Phyllis and Jaime talk, you heard them say, and I wasn't that special relative to many of the kids who had a very different path. And so this question of like how you build a system that actually does it for everyone, that does it, especially we know it does it for the kids who are well-resourced, but it does it for exceptions along the way. And how do you make that for everyone? So as we jump into that, Topeka, I want you to talk about the work that you're doing, and in particular, the difficulties of the population that you serve.
For sure. So just to kind of add what everyone else is, how I come to the work. So I come to the work as a woman of color who was a young girl who came in a two-family home in Manorville, Long Island, who were franchise business owners and entrepreneurs, who had an opportunity to go to college and take piano lessons and have a recital at Carnegie Hall, and went to college in Baltimore City to study computer science at Morgan State University, at which point I ended up going from campus into the city and seeing a world that I did not know anything about from where I was raised. And so through my journey and really understanding what was happening, I got caught up. And in getting caught up, I made some decisions that landed me into prison. And when I went to prison, in federal prison, I also was a privileged woman even there. Being privileged in incarceration, understanding that I had access to resources, access to opportunity, and that though it was very difficult and the conditions stripped dignity, specifically dignity for women, that still I had visits every week. I had money and commissary and people who cared and loved me and wanted to make sure that I had access and opportunity to when I came home. And whether it was that I wanted to further my education, whether I wanted to start an organization or new business, that I could do that. But there were so many women that I had met that could not. And so while I was incarcerated, I really saw what was happening with women specifically. And I'm thinking about even when I had the opportunity, thank you, Deborah, for inviting us to the ladies' lunch yesterday, and think about how women are so disenfranchised or marginalized anyway. But then thinking about women, and then being a woman of color, and then being a woman of color who was formerly incarcerated, and what opportunities do we have when we come out? And the fact that there's these hidden incarcerations that people don't talk about, that there's the post-incarceration barriers, that you have to check a box and find out whether or not you can be hired for a job that you could probably have created on your own. And so thinking about the women that I left behind and understanding that women specifically when I was incarcerated end up having adult continuing education classes like knitting and crocheting, plastic canvassing, and beading. And how did those courses or continuing education classes help to further anyone's skill set in order to come into a workforce? So when you think about the school-to-prison pipeline, you don't want the prison-to-prison pipeline, right? Because then people end up coming back. And so I was fortunate enough to come back and have mentors and resources through friends and organizations and institutions like Columbia University, where I was able to tap into things that helped me to then further what I wanted to do and then pour into other women and girls who were coming home.
Great. Connie.
Thanks, Jim. I want to start just with two comments first. One is that I want to deeply, deeply thank John Legend for coming and joining us and for giving an incredibly inspiring and motivational talk and calling out the moment that we're in for a movement, which I think could not be more important. I also want to thank him for the incredible honor of being able to work with him on LRNG Innovators over the last 3 or 4 years. The second comment I want to make is I just want to note that this is what the equitable panel of the future looks like, and I want to thank you all for letting me join you on this panel, because I just think this is such an important conversation that we're having tonight. The filter that I come from, there are lots of different ways and different stories I can say about which filter that I come with. The one that I want to share with you tonight is that I am, in 2000, I started a wonderfully privileged job of being the Director of Education at the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation. And we were doing very traditional educational grant making. Around 2002, 2003, our then President Jonathan Fanton and John Sleep Brown, who's a former head of Xerox PARC, came to me and said, we're going to end all of our grant making in education and in public education, and we want to spend the rest of our time sort of looking around the corner to really understand how technology and digital media may change the way in which learning and education looks like. To which I said, in my brilliance, I said, well, I quit. I have no interest in that. I am here because I care about social justice. That is what my passion is, and technology has nothing to do with that. So brilliance has always been my strong point, as well as foresight into the future. Fortunately, they said, well, why don't you take some time off, continue to do this work half-time, and spend the other half-time doing some other things? I embedded myself for a year in National Writing Project, one of the most amazing teacher professional development communities I think we have in the country. And I spent time meeting amazing innovators. And within a year, I realized, oh my God, we now have the tools in order to create the kinds of pedagogically rich learning experiences that we can scale for all of our kids. That was in 2003. And now I can also say, God damn it, we missed a generation. We didn't do it over the last 10, 15 years. And so the moment that I think John Legend is calling us to is now is the time that we have got to transform the learning experiences that our young people are having at scale for all of our kids. The last thing I'll say is the work that I do at LRNG is to take the incredible work that we saw in that sizzle reel of LRNG innovators. Those teachers are doing heroic things. We do not have an educational system that enables that kind of work to scale to all of our kids. And we actually need a differently designed infrastructure that enables ecosystems to thrive in the communities where they most need to thrive. And that's the work that we're doing with LRNG.
Fantastic. So let's pick up right on that point, because I think what happens oftentimes is we have these kind of lofty conversations, and what exactly it needs to look like, what exactly it is, the experience the students need to have, what kind of environments they need to be in, what kind of relationships they need to be involved in. It's not clear to people, and so we walk out and everybody walks out thinking they have a really inspiring idea, but they go to do different work when they leave. Before I turn to my specific question, I'm going to just note something else. I was really nervous about tonight. And I was nervous about tonight because it would be very easy for the social justice night to be the black and brown night. And I think it is so important that we all recognize we are in this work together. And I just so appreciate everybody who is here and in the work. So with that, let's talk about what it actually takes to do this work. And Connie, I want you to start because John specifically described a world that was both in school and out of school. Yeah. That touched on employers, that touched on community-based assets, and touched on schools. Mm-hmm. And I know you're involved in creating that connective tissue. Mm-hmm. So I want you to talk a little bit about the what in terms of the infrastructure that's required, and then I want to come back to everyone chiming in on about, and then what kinds of things we need to put in that infrastructure.
And I'll try to be brief, but I take the vision that John laid out in his keynote deeply seriously, and so have really, with the whole community of folks, been pressing on what is the infrastructure that needs to exist in order to allow all of us to participate in transforming the lives of our young people. And so I want to do it by giving you an example of work that's going on in Chicago right now. That is a pilot, it's just beginning, but I think it really begins to tell the story of how we can all participate together. And as I'm telling the story, there are three things that I think are at core to the what of needs to happen in order for the ecosystem to be built. One is that we need to be able to count learning wherever and whenever it happens. In the story I'm going to tell you, we do that with open badges. The second thing is that we have to have lightweight tools that allow us to connect competency pathways together with strong learning environments wherever those learning environments exist, online, offline, in school, out of school. Third, we have to connect when kids build competency and demonstrate competency, it has to connect to opportunity. We have this massive gap between when kids learn and when an opportunity connects for them, and we've got to shorten that gap. So here's the story. Apple comes into Chicago. Employer, absolutely critical to have employers at the table. And they say what we're all used to folks now saying to us is we want everybody to be able to code. And so we want to come in and help teachers learn how to code, and we have a curriculum called Swift Curriculum. Terrific. Absolutely what Apple does, it's what they should do. Chicago has an incredible summer youth employment program, One Summer Chicago. They say to Apple, awesome, but here's the thing. If we're going to double down on kids learning how to code, they need jobs. Are you going to bring jobs to the table for summer youth employment for these kids to actually use those skills immediately? Apple says, well, we actually don't employ that many folks, but we have a lot of customers. We can bring IBM and Rush Presbyterian Hospital, and we can bring McDonald's all to the table for jobs. Fantastic. But then where are the kids going to learn how to code, right? And part of what we can do is we can badge kids who have that competency wherever they learn it, so when they show up for the job. So we're doing that with One Summer Chicago, we're doing that with Apple. Nonprofit partners across Chicago, particularly in our low-income communities, in Austin and Pilsen and around, raise their hands and say, we can do after-school coding clubs. We want our young people to be able to code. They have the Swift curriculum, they can badge it so it's going to count, and we've got jobs that can be unlocked. But then the local partners say, but wait a minute, it's not just the coding that matters. We want our kids to be able to solve community-based problems. We want them to be able to use technology in a way that advances our community. So we add in with them into this competency-based pathway a whole set of brainstorming and design challenges that says to the kids, what problem in your community do you want to solve? They come up with incredible problems that they want to solve, and then the next challenge to them is, so how would you solve that with a mobile app? The kids then come up with really inspiring ideas about what their mobile app would look like. So we can badge them around civic engagement and community engagement. And now they're on their pathway to build and learn Swift coding because they're going to build the app. Well, the school system says, we don't have the time to actually build this into our curriculum because this is happening now. We can run boot camps during spring break and badge there. We can have showcases to celebrate these kids all across Chicago as they're both becoming community leaders, problem solvers, and learning how to code and getting jobs. Amazing assets in our communities, all making this happen. We didn't create any of that, it was there. The combination of Apple with opportunities is a magnet to bring people together, but an ecosystem of lightweight technology that enables connection creates the ecosystem.
Thanks for that, Connie. I think it's a really powerful example because it shows how to make those connections across. Mm-hmm. I think that we have all kind of come clean with the notion that this is the kind of ecosystem you need to create to allow many, many kinds of kids to thrive. Mm-hmm. I think that we also struggle with the fact that we have failed over time to figure out how you actually scale what all kids need to thrive to be affordable and accessible to all. And so I want to actually come to you to talk about, well, who are the kids that are getting left out and what do we need to do to address those needs? Either John or Anurima, please lean in terms of the things you've been thinking about on that front.
Go ahead.
You go ahead.
I think we heard from John earlier a lot about the kids who are being left out of this process. This is not a surprise to anybody, right? So we are at a time where a lot of the innovations that we're talking about at the summit are not ones that talk about students with disabilities, that talk about English learners, which are a significant population in not just on the coast, but in every part of this country. We're not talking about the ways in which children who are experiencing trauma and a whole host of challenges around their developmental potential are getting the kind of supports that they need, and instead are in situations where we basically have 2-year-old metal detectors and 20-year-old books, right? So we're talking about the places where we see much more of a presence of law enforcement and a situation in which, we had cases all over this country where students were being arrested so that they could get counseling as a means to get counseling, or students were being arrested for wearing the wrong color socks. Those are the kinds of places where the educational needs of students are not being privileged over the ways in which they need to be supported and feel safe. And so, I think those are the vulnerable communities that I would lay out. I also just think that the conversations we're having in our broader communities about sexual violence and racial violence, we have to realize the ways in which that is not only includes our youngest children, which is really hard for us to all be able to talk about and acknowledge, but also the ways in which those moments of violence are impacting our children, and the time that we are in is being internalized all over this country, both in terms of the way in which they view their own potential, but the way in which they view their own safety and ability to engage in school and in the community.
Thanks. I want to push John, you had, through both your work as secretary I don't think either of us mentioned these, the former Secretary of Education. And in your role at Trust, have the opportunity to see people who are trying to do this work right, who are trying to change their discipline policies, who are trying to address the needs of kids that have trauma. So why don't you take a second to talk about what it looks like in systems where this work is going right and how we begin to think about scaling that.
Yeah. I think it's a question of having the right incentives and the right policy environment. So the right incentives means how do we incentivize people focusing on closing opportunity gaps for low-income students and students of color? So I think about in higher ed, a place like Georgia State that is using better advising systems to help first-generation students, low-income students, students of color graduate. They have largely closed the racial gaps in their graduation rates at Georgia State through smart use of intrusive advising, which I call nagging. But the idea is, you know, an advisor calls you if you registered for the wrong class, or an advisor calls you if you got a bad grade in the midterm and says, what are you going to do about it? What everyone in this room would do for our own kids, that's what Georgia State is doing institutionally to try and close those gaps. But the incentives in higher ed don't necessarily align with that yet. That's great leadership at Georgia State. The reality is the incentive in higher ed is mostly to enroll as many students as possible. And whether or not they finish is still secondary. We have to change that. Technology. There are places, and Connie gave one example, there are a bunch of examples around the country, places where technology is being used in smart ways to unlock opportunity for kids that otherwise wouldn't be available to them. I think about the work that Project Lead the Way is doing with computer-assisted design, where you've got kids, I always use this example, you got kids where they work in a pair. Connie and I do the design on computer, then we swap designs, go in the shop. She builds my design, I build hers. Amazing. But the reality is, in most of the product sector, the incentives are sell to as many people as possible, not get great student outcomes, close achievement gaps for students of color. So the incentives aren't right. The last point I make is that there are policy changes that we know work in small increments that we should take to scale much faster. You know, I so admire what Topeka does and the work that she is leading. In the mid-90s, Congress did a very dumb thing and banned access to Pell Grants for folks who are incarcerated. Just terrible public policy. We know that folks who are incarcerated get educational programs while they are much less likely to return to prison, much more likely to be successful when they return to the community. So in the Obama administration, we put resources into a pilot program, 69 universities that are using Pell Grants to support folks who are incarcerated getting access to college courses. It's a wonderful thing, and it's too small. 69 universities is not enough. We should take that national. We should do it right away, right? So part of the challenge is we have these pockets of excellence and innovation, but we aren't smart about scaling the incentives and the policy environment to get where we need to go.
So I'm going to come back to you on that one because there is an opportunity to start to move some of those things, and people are trying to do it. I want to talk about what that looks like. But Topeka, I want to, we've alluded to the work that you do and how you create hope for people who have been incarcerated. Why don't you describe that work and what it looks like when the system breaks down for somebody, but then you help them recover?
Oh, sure. So the work that I do at my organization is called the Ladies of Hope Ministries, and we're based out of New York, and we help women who are transitioning back from prison through education, entrepreneurship, advocacy, and spiritual empowerment. And so we connect women with resources that typically they would not get if they went into the probation office and asked them, hey, I need some help, this is what I need to do. We make sure that they do them. We also provide housing. So we have a safe housing space called Hope House, which makes sure that women have a beautiful and safe place to live, because we do know that the #1 problem with people who are coming home is safe housing. And the #1 thing that anyone needs, right? And the #1 thing that anyone needs is a safe place to live. So what we would like to do is make sure that we're able to provide that for women in New York. We're going to expand it within New York City and then across the country where there's a prison or jail, making sure that women have housing first and then access to education, entrepreneurship, and resources through advocacy. Thank you. And I just wanted to touch on one other thing.
Yeah, please.
Thank you. And I wanted to also touch on another thing. Just that the largest workforce development hub of people who are incarcerated and formerly incarcerated, and yet it is so underserved. And you know, we need to start thinking about how do we tap into our population, right? Because there are the most brilliant innovators, creators, like myself and my other cohort members that are in the room from the Unlock Futures cohort. I want to give them, right? Who just need the education, the access to the opportunity in order to transform and thrive in their lives. And so I really want us to think about how do we make sure that this is all of our responsibility and not just those who may have been directly impacted, but those of us who are also impacted because we're all in this country together.
So I want to close us out on this question, right? Because there are two things that I think that I've started to realize after a couple of decades in this work. One is that I think about myself as being in the education business for a long time, and what I've started to say is that I'm actually in the power business. And what I mean by that is that a very specific definition of power is the ability to create, limit, or make choices for oneself or others. And there is nothing that does that like education. The second thing is that, as we've described, our big challenge, though, is about scale, about reach, about how we get it to everyone. And that one of the reasons that we fail to actually create equity is the inability to scale what people need to thrive affordably, and to be able to create the context for that to happen. So I'm going to go back to you, John, because I warned you, but then anybody can go. How do we begin thinking about this work, not in dozens of people, not in hundreds of thousands of people, but in the millions of people we need to touch, and especially those folks that we need to touch most?
Well, look, I think this is an organizing challenge, right? I mean, Phyllis talked about the anniversary of the assassination of Dr. King. One of the things that was hard being in Memphis a couple weeks ago to mark that horrible anniversary is that Memphis, a lot of the indicators of economic inequality, racial inequality, look very similar today to 50 years ago, right? We haven't lived up to the legacy of Dr. King around organizing for a more just society. So what does organizing look like? Well, this is a powerful room of people who could organize, one, in your own community, right? So this question of, John and Anurima both brought up the issue of school segregation. That's a choice that communities make. That's a choice communities make about school attendance zones. It's a choice communities make about housing policy. That's made at school board meetings and city council meetings and town council meetings every day. We ought to organize around different decisions. There are state-level policy questions. John brought up the issue of suspension of kids from school, the school-to-prison pipeline. 18% of the kids in pre-K are African-American. 48% of the kids suspended from pre-K are African-American. Pre-K, 4-year-olds, right, who are sent home from school as though that's going to make it better, right? So there are communities around the country and states that have said, no, we're just going to ban suspensions in pre-K. And we're going to say that for 4-year-olds, we can figure out a better way, right? So there's political organizing to move policy. There's community organizing to change policies in the community. And then there is driving with investment a different vision. Does the designer of a new software a new app start with the question, how can I address equity issues for low-income students, students of color, English learners, or students with disabilities? Or do they start with, I'm going to design it for the regular kid, question what regular means, and then afterwards, oh yeah, and what about kids of color? And oh yeah, what about English learners? And oh yeah, what about students with disabilities? No, that's exactly backwards. We should start with an equity vision, right? And what investors choose to invest in, who they choose to invest in, helps to shape that.
I think there's a couple of questions to expand who's in the work and also how we actually make the work more affordable. And so on who's in the work, I think one of the questions for all of us is trying to think differently about not who we're innovating for, but who we're innovating with. And specifically, how do we use all that creativity from those who are incarcerated and formerly incarcerated to the children in our schools who are at an unprecedented moment of being able to figure out themselves how they can bring transformation to what's going on in their communities. How do we actually engage more in the work of innovation? And also the very simple thing that we all know in education, which is when we don't address things on the front end, we pay dearly for them on the back end. And so when people talk about affordability, to me, I just don't understand why it is that the kind of cost that we have when we don't address everything from trauma to segregation to people not having educational opportunities on the front end when we're expelling pre-K students rather than actually figuring out how their brains develop and we can support that, we end up paying for it much more so on the back end. And I'm trying to figure out how we actually change the paradigm to not be one where, again, like we're hiring lawyers instead of hiring people who can prevent and treat and counsel on the front end.
So there's a few things. What I consistently heard was everyone talk about children in our K through 12 population. And if we don't address the needs of them, then they become kids who go into baby jails, who become adults who go into prisons. And I think it's very important for us to make sure that we are focusing on these populations that are underserved. Like, that's extremely important. I also think that we also need to look at the population and say the same things that are helping the children, the access to education and opportunity, is the same thing that's going to help people who are incarcerated. And how do we give those resources and opportunities so when people come home, they can thrive? Also, I'm thinking about, again, when I was talking about the knitting and crocheting, right? We don't need a future leaders who can knit and crochet. We need programmers, right? We need people who can code, and we need software developers. And all of these are people who are inside the prisons as well. So I want us to redefine diversity, thinking about what does that look like, that it should include not only those based on race, religion, and gender, but also people who've experienced things differently in their life who also have the ability to build and exceed and be as great as any one of us in this room.
Yeah, I agree with everything that my colleagues have said, and I don't know that I have anything special to add to it. So given that this is an ed tech audience, what I will also add is that at the end of the day, learning is relational and learning is social. And it happens in communities. And we all have to be a part of building those communities. We all have our own skills and assets that we can bring to this conversation and be a part of this moment in this movement. But we can only do that if we come as good listeners and as learners in the participation of figuring out what the solution is. If we come to this with, I know everything about education, or I've had my one conversation with a student or my one conversation with a teacher, we've missed the moment. And so we all have to come to this with our skills and assets, ready to dig deep, understanding it is the moral question of our time, and participate as learners with the kids and with the teachers. And our tools have to enable that.
So we're wrapping here. I just wanted to say one more time, the reason I wanted to come is because when I come here, I know I'm with the people who are some of the most innovative problem solvers that I know. They are in the work, they are doing the work, and they're trying to change lives. But the pace at which we need to move, it only is getting more urgent that we move faster and think bigger. And so I hope this conversation and the frame that John prepared for us helps us land in that place. I'm going to make an audible now because I was supposed to bring John back up here to a couple more questions. But I'm just going to ask him, I think is he back there? Come on, John, can you just come up here?
Yeah.
Great. I'm not going to ask you any more questions tonight, but I want everyone here to be able to thank our panelists and to thank you for the table that you set and the challenge you put before us. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. No, we're not.